Hello and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 62 with Sadè Abraham, a cohort member of mine from my master's program that I talked to several weeks ago. Actually, I was kind of prepping some recording and editing and scheduling out episodes while I was going to be away on my vacation with my wife to Europe, which was an amazing trip. We went to London, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Nice to be able to unplug my first international trip as well. So it was an amazing time celebrating my 30th birthday, which was in May. So just an all-around amazing time. So this is kind of a backdated episode a little bit that I edited for this week. So you will hear that Sadè mentions Game of Thrones. I'm not sure how she feels about the finale. I know it was a little bit divisive for people, but she was enjoying the final season at the time. But yeah, really appreciated talking with Sadè about her very unique kind of global journey early now in her career through higher ed, working abroad in the Middle East and then coming back to get a second master's and working at Harvard. She's done some really cool work and just really like trying to catch up with, cool people from my cohort. Of course, I think they're all amazing, and I'm sure eventually we'll get to all of them. But so kind of getting back to recording some new episodes here in the next couple of weeks. So those will be a little bit more fresh for you, but still an amazing conversation here. Episode number 62 with Sadè Abraham. Yeah, just really appreciate you making time for the show here and for us to catch up and to kind of talk through your really interesting journey. And yeah, we'll just start there. We'll start, as we always do, with your introduction and your kind of professional journey so far and how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. It was a blast going to grad school with you, and I'm really excited that we were able to reconvene for this as well. I think my professional journey, I guess has to start with the academic part of the journey. So I did undergrad in New York, psych major, did my master's with you in higher ed, college student affairs. And sometime during the second semester at Rutgers, we took a leadership class. I don't know if you remember this, but took a leadership class. And I read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. And, many folks have critiqued that book for, as a person of color, as a woman of color, they said that, there's very little you can take from this book because it has nothing to do with your identities, or most of your identities. So as a low income woman of color, there was some would say that there was very little I could connect with on that in that read. But I found a lot to connect with, actually. And it inspired me so much that I decided, this is my time to lean in. So my first professional job right out of grad school was outside of the country in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, working for U.S. institutions abroad, and then spent 3 years in the Middle East, 3 years, 2 years in Abu Dhabi, 1 year in Dubai, and then came back to do my cognitive neuroscience degree, another master's at Harvard. And I continue to be there now. Somehow or another, in asking questions and connecting with folks, I ended up working halfway through my program, and I've continued to do that work in different capacities, but supporting first-generation low-income students since then.
Very cool. Well, I think it's that point, too, that you made, I think that Lean In book, has faced a fair amount of criticism, which I think is fair. And it's just the idea that, I feel like I've mentioned it in different contexts on the podcast before, but, honing in on any one individual or one thing to be, all things to be perfect and all that, it's
right.
This idea of, one book needing to be, perfect, flawless advice that can, just, apply to everybody. It's yes, I think it could be a, inspirational jumping point, but, yeah, there's a lot of details that, certain people, it's just not going to be relevant to them.
And that's a high bar for anybody to, have to achieve in one writing or piece or anything,
right, exactly.
to be all things to all people. It's impossible.
Because I feel like I read a lot of books that are sort of startup-y books or entrepreneurial, and it's always, just this white guy who's I was working this 6-figure job for 5 years, and I was just, you know what, I'm just gonna leave it all behind. It's because you probably had a huge safety net, and you probably came from money, and you didn't, so it's that's super applicable to most people to just be just leave and just whatever.
Exactly. And I always think that just take the meat and throw out the bone. That's what that was a strategy I had when I was reading the book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get what I can get out of this. And, whatever else, whatever. But I was happy that it did apply to me in many different ways and actually change the trajectory of where I was thinking I was going to go next. So
interesting. Well, I guess you can, it's sort of in grad school, and I guess I'm not sure, we always ask people kind of about like their, their origin story and like their college experience or just sort of wherever they might have had kind of, those like pivotal moments or crossroads or whatever you might want to call them. So, you had that one in grad school, and maybe if you want to explore that and talk about that a little bit more, and, maybe any or all, I guess, but just any of those experiences, because I feel like I remember you mentioning a lot, like your undergrad, obviously for a lot of people, that's sort of what leads them into a career in higher ed is somehow their experience with or around college, so I guess, any of those things that kind of still resonate for you, whether it's from undergrad or, the stuff that, happened in grad school, any of those things that come to mind, I guess, that are still personally and or professionally resonant for you.
Yeah, certainly. So starting off with undergrad, I went to a small state university in New York, definitely not like top tier. I think it was a great experience. I think it was a perfect experience for me. But, middle class folks who, are really trying to change trajectories for themselves and their families. I didn't know all that then, right? But, and I know that now. And it was really a great experience because I think that, for me now going to having experiences in many different institutions, Research One institutions, great schools as well. But I also think that when you're at the Research One institution, a lot of times professors, as we know, they're there, but they also are writing a book, and they're also on speaking tours, and they're also, and that's great. And I think in grad school we talked about like, the international scholar or the brand name scholar,
right.
And then there's the local teacher, and I went to school with the local teachers, and I think that was great because I think I got to see the craft of teaching done 100% and done really, really well. And because of that, I was really inspired. And I was also inspired by the folks that supported those students there. Like the higher ed thing, as usual. You didn't plan on it, but you end up getting roped in some way or another. And that was me. I started working on campus, and really it went from there. So I was the undergraduate director of student activities. I didn't even think there was supposed to be a job like that when I was an undergrad. And I really, went full into the experience of working in student affairs. But I will say in grad school at Rutgers, I didn't realize that this was going to be a theme throughout my entire academic journey from that point on. I thought it was just something I was interested in then. But we had a class about student development theory where we had to create our own theory. I don't know if you also recall this one. And I did a theory on situational identity using Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. And I thought it was just cool then, blah, blah, blah. But I realized that that's one of the foundations of my interest in some of the work I'm currently doing in student affairs. I'm fascinated by situational identities or multiple identities and the tensions that you hold when you have multiple identities that are seemingly incomparable, right? So at that point, I didn't know all of that. I was just fascinated by code switching for certain populations of folks, but now I see that in my work right now with first generation low income students in highly elite spaces, what that looks like to toggle between your roots and where you're going next. So working at Harvard, I see students who were in the lowest 1% of the income distribution in the United States transition in the matter of 4 years to the top 1%. Right? So what does that look like? Or at least have the tools to transition into the top 1%. What does that look like? What are the conversations that we're having with these students about that transition? Do we do enough of a good job speaking about what that looks like for you? What are the ways of being? What are the, rules of engagement that are different? What are the ones that are the same? What are the things you should hold on to from your previous background? And what are the things you need to let go of, right? And I don't think we do enough justice to having those conversations with students. So that has resonated with me, just toggling identities and the difficulty and the tension that creates for people, despite what your identities are, but just the tension in between that as you're navigating your personal, professional, and academic life.
Yeah. I mean, that's good stuff. And I think, just any of those like pieces for, because I think whether it's, something that somebody kind of, identify with in terms of like that theory that you made as sort of like, oh, that really like captures, because like you kind of made it for yourself, and that's kind of like your North Star of like how you really view your work. And I think whether it's something as specific as that, or just like, because I can't even remember the theory that I made, but I feel like that it is that idea of like creating your professional identity in higher ed. You kind of like, you're remixing and mashing up and kind of creating like, well, this is how to, how I kind of come at it and how I really try to work with students. And, I think it's, as much as I think also there's a lot of criticism now for like kind of a saturation of, everything requires a master, even like entry level work in higher ed. But like,
Yeah.
it still, I think, really helps you articulate the way that you work with students, which you could certainly also develop as you're just doing the work. But I think the professional programs certainly still have a place. And if we just moderate it by like, okay, there doesn't need to be as many programs or whatever, it's a whole other topic. But
Right.
yeah, I think that's really interesting to me because I guess also when you came back stateside and
Yes.
I guess this kind of transitions into your current work too, like, you know, you decided to get a second master's and now you're really, I think, digging into that work that you identified that you wanted to do. And I guess I don't know if that was sort of furthered or cemented when you were abroad, but I guess talk about that. I guess if like you really are bringing this very like cognitive perspective to like your higher ed work. So like, it's very complex. It's very kind of like, I think, nuanced. And obviously there's maybe not any one right answer. You're maybe just helping people to, you know, think about their thinking and those sort of things. So like, you know, maybe just, like transition us into your current work and what's keeping you like motivated and excited and like committed to this work that I think could be very like, you know, I don't know, like an idea that it's structured, but there's no like, you know, one right answer sort of thing. So like what's keeping you motivated as you've like transitioned in this kind of unique work?
Yeah. So my research last year here at Harvard for my degree was focused on understand what I proposed to Harvard, what my research is going to be on, is understanding and unpacking how toxic stress, adversity, and trauma affect learning and development. And the context of that was poverty, essentially. So I was curious about what those experiences with food insecurity look like 20 years later. I was curious about what stress looks like after struggling for X amount of years. How does that manifest in the brain? And what are the implications of that for learning and development? So it definitely was on a quest there. That was one of many questions. But in some ways I got the answers. In some ways I haven't. I think when we finally got to that section in neuroscience, I was hyperventilating in class. Like the person next to me was like, "Are you okay?" Like, you know, because I had waited so long to like really delve into it and hear the truth. And, you know, having an understanding now of how it does affect learning and development and what to do with that information and who's responsible for holding that information and using it in a responsible way that doesn't turn into some problematic things we've seen in the past, you know? So if we know that, like, you know, certain folks are really having a difficult time, not just, you know, and there's neurological implications to poverty, what do we do with that, you know? So in my current work right now, I think when I came to that understanding, I was with my students and I'm working on projects. I was also working on the program that we launched here at Harvard for first generation low income students. And I'm like, when do you tell students this information? One, neuroscience is always changing, right? So is this really true and how long will this be true for, you know? And two, does this help someone? Does this serve someone to say, hey, you got to Harvard, but you had almost insurmountable odds and you've been affected even to the neurological and cognitive level by your poverty, but you still push through that. But that still means that you may need support, you know? And then some of the things that you think are like maybe just you when you're really stressed out. No, that there are good reasons for that. Does that help someone to push them further or does that debilitate someone? And I've found a mixed bag with that. I've found students that have said, yeah, can you never tell me that ever again? You know, I just got here. I'm really excited about the idea of going through all these odds and making it here. I believe that I am equal to all of the folks that are in the classroom with me, and they are in many ways. I don't need to hear this type of stuff because it's going to mess up my performance. And others were like, this makes so much sense. I'm going to get the tools I need now that I'm aware of this to whatever extra support, whatever things I need to work through internally to be able to be at my peak performance because of the experiences of my past. So I don't bring it into my everyday to day in terms of like speaking to students about it because I think it's been jarring and there have been different responses. But, you know, Nadine Burke, she's the Surgeon General of California. She's done this work. I think she was at Harvard as well. And she's talking about, you know, poverty and the effects of toxic stress, trauma, and adversity. But the question is, what do you do with that on the ground level? And I keep it in the back of my head as I interact with my students, but what does that look like? And I guess in terms of programming, I try to implement things that will help and kind of give that to them in a way that doesn't overwhelm a student in their experience.
Interesting. Yeah, just like still continually like honing and sort of contouring, the knowledge. Like you're saying, it's like, I know these things. Like, what do I do with it? It's like, I've now
exactly.
been granted this power of responsibility kind of thing.
Exactly. And there's like a huge responsibility there,
Yeah.
So, as the saying goes.
And it wraps up into like, like students experiencing like food insecurity and homelessness, like those sort of things. It's like if that's been part of their past or if that's what they're experiencing now, and just identifying, obviously, like there's a gap and a problem that, can be solved, but then also just like understanding, like you're saying, like the impact that that's going to have on their learning, their kind of engagement, or their persistence or likelihood to do that, just of like, what they've had to go through to get to that point. So it's valuable knowledge, and just like, I think it can, certainly, inform programming. It can form policies or processes, or just,
And I also realized I completely skipped your question kind of in the work up to it. But like the motivation for that is that there are students who, despite the odds, on paper, this shouldn't have happened, right? And they did it, like, so what does that mean? Like, like how do we hold both and still say like, wow, this person most likely should not be here, like, and they are kicking butt. So what do you do with that? Like, and I think that motivates me in my work, that I'm going to make sure that as you go through this experience every day, every problem set, every essay, every paper, that I'm giving you the tools, the most resources that you can have to get through this successfully and thrive, not just survive, but thrive in your experience.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, just being inspired by their example, that's a beautiful thing. And, playing your small role, like whatever, like you said, it's just like whatever, you can contribute to, help them along in that.
Absolutely.
That's really good. Well, I think also perhaps what kind of resonated with me is knowing that you've really committed to, I think, a lot of this like very kind of cerebral, thoughtful, like academic work of, really having a full understanding of, the landscape of what current college students are experiencing and coming into college with. So, I think it's just properly geeky and nerdy. It's always something I appreciate of like kind of approaching this work, is just like, hitting the books and everything. So I guess if there's, things that are like professionally related that you've really been connecting with, or like personally that are like informing, just you existing in the world as a human, but like what do you like, like geeking out about right now? Like what's capturing your attention? If it's stuff like that you've discovered recently, or have always been into, or anything. I mean, so we can dig in with different pieces and all that. But like what are you geeking out about?
Let's see, what am I geeking out about? I'm geeking out about perfectionism and its maladaptive behaviors. I know that's like but that's what I'm geeking out about right now. I'm geeking out about unrelenting standards and how that control and perfectionism, how they're all linked and they show up in high achieving people. So I recently did a presentation on that here at the Graduate School of Education for women who identify as high achieving and also perfectionists. I think there's so much research and so much work going on about that. And like there's a current debate. I don't even know if it's current, but there has been a debate on whether perfectionism can be adaptive and there can be some type of good perfectionism. Some say that there's no way that it's possible. Others say that no, there are ways that this can push you to, your best work, right? So that's something that I'm really thinking about, especially in the context like Harvard. There are a lot of people who are perfectionists. There are a lot of high achieving students, and there's a lot of perfectionism there. So just wondering and unpacking what that looks like. And I'm also geeking out right now about there's a kind of relates to what I was speaking about before. There's a book called The Body Keeps Score. And I think the byline of that is like the body, mind, and the brain, mind, and the body in the healing of trauma. And again, that kind of goes directly into what I was speaking about, but what it looks like to, even if you think you've moved on, what are the remnants of that and how you move through the world, So those are the two things that I really, and then on a lighter note, I love Strength Quest and I love MBTIs. So assessments that, some buy into, some don't. But how, even if I found that students, when I do presentations on both, they don't buy into, some folks don't like believe in it, but then I always get a call or an email like 6 months later when they're about to do an interview and they're like, Can you send me your scores again? Those scores again. I have something, like, there were some insights in there that I thought would be really interesting about how do you articulate the things that you're good at. And like, maybe you knew these things, but a lot of people, you didn't know how to word it in a way that would sound compelling in an interview and in a conversation. So, they always come back around when it comes to those MBTI and Strength Quest assessments. So I'm a big fan of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always been a fan as well. It's been a while since I've taken like strengths and stuff, and I think it, it can like change, over time, and like maybe like what organization you're with or those sort of things. But
right.
just appreciating that like everything matters, and just it gives you.
Exactly.
It was actually one of my like first blog posts I ever wrote was about all that stuff, like because it was
Really?
during grad school, and it performed really well because I think it is like the way that I captured it was like the language of leadership, because that's the idea, like especially when you're interviewing, it's just that idea of like, how do you contribute to a team? And it's like, it doesn't matter what your answer is. You just need to be like clear and confident in what your answer is and the value that has.
And if you're foggy on what your own value add is, like, good luck with someone else. Some people may have a idea of it, but you should probably take some time to hone in and clarify what you're good at. Like, and not just have basic answers for that, but really dig deep on the things that you're talented at. Mm-hmm. It really goes a long way. And I see the students really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that, it's so interesting. Actually, another thing that I was writing on, because it actually came as a recommendation from my wife, of like that idea of like nurturing high achieving students. Because I think in my world lately, like it's been a lot with like, it's like online, like adult learners and these things. And it's just like, these people are like working full time, they have families, and like typically we're perceiving like, okay, there's a lot of these students who are just struggling academically, so they're maybe not the high achieving student, but like it can still take shape in the online space too, I think. But like so I guess it's not necessarily different, but just the idea of like generally, like nurturing high achieving students who are like perfectionists and are like doing all the things, and are, like you're saying, like there is a like physical like toll, there's like an emotional toll, there is a cost to all these things where it's like, wow, you're just like, rocking on all cylinders, you're doing amazing, like, performing well academically and all that. But it's like still sort of reaching out to everybody, and not only sort of following up and being reactive to like the at-risk triggers that students might have and those sort of things. Like that was sort of like what I was trying to get at with what I was writing, was, being kind of proactive and being mindful to be kind of inclusive to all students, even the ones who might seem from the outside to not need additional support. That they might need just a different kind of help to build like a healthier balance and habits and those sort of things.
Exactly. And they always say, like, in student affairs, I don't know if they always say this, but I use this as a rule of thumb, but to build with the most vulnerable in mind, like put the most vulnerable, center the most vulnerable, and a lot of times you'll be able to check a lot of other boxes. And that most vulnerable can shape shift given the context. But if you're thinking about those on the margins as you are intentionally planning things, then you're already on the right track,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess on that, like, if there's anything that's kind of like top of mind, and it can be just like fun stuff too. I get like anything like in both sides of the house, kind of like stuff that you're doing, like kind of professional development thought, or just like more entertainment wise. But like, what are you like reading, watching, listening to? Like, what are the things that you're connecting with lately? I don't know what kind of like your kind of like pop culture diet or any of those things, or what you have time for, I guess. But it's always cool to talk through any of those and like include them in the show.
Okay. This is when people are going to start judging me probably for several different reasons. So one, let's see, I really gotten into like South African house. I don't know if anyone knows anything about that, but like Afro house is pretty awesome. Like I'm into house EDM in general, but like recently got down to the continent and like African continent and South Africa in particular, and really been enjoying and jamming out to some of the great songs. There's a song called Akana Mali. I don't know if it's really fully in the house space, but this is my like song of the week recently. So that's been pretty cool. Also, I've been really, I'm nervous to say this because this is like a geeking out podcast, and I feel like the that listen here and have a larger working knowledge than I do. But I saw Game of Thrones last night. No spoilers, but I'm geeking out over Game of Thrones, and I watched everything else before, of course. But like that episode was just a masterpiece for so many reasons. And a person that considers herself spiritual or like religious in some way, I saw a lot of like interesting undertones there in the narrative and the storytelling that I'm just really appreciative of. So I'm just really geeking out. I love expert knowledge, and I love when people do things with excellence in mind, in the spirit of excellence. And I feel like that episode was done. Everything in Game of Thrones was pretty much done in the spirit of excellence, but they pushed it. Last night, they definitely pushed it. So, and I'm talking about episode, I think 2 of the season, in case folks are wondering which one I'm referring to. So that was something I'm geeking out about.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like solidified itself with just a lot of those kind of episodes of just like, which I have not kept up with it, but I want to like, once it's all done, I will like sit through and just work through it at my own pace. That would be a treat. It's like, it's always going to be there. And that's the beauty of, certainly now, like entertainment is just like a library of all this like really awesome stuff that people have created is just there to enjoy. But yeah, it's like solidified itself as like a pretty seminal kind of piece of certainly geek culture. But then, like I've heard a lot of people talk, which is like nice because I kind of that sort of aspect of it resonates with me as well. It's just like kind of just like the hard work and the vision and just like the cinematography that goes into like creating these things. So it's definitely like beautifully done, and it's, you know, you can really see, I think, a lot of people's hard work and a lot of like money and hours have gone into this, and it shows. So
absolutely. So and then that's pretty much what I get. And learning how to cook is a side thing of mine. So
Well, and I guess, do you listen to that music? Like, is that sort of like your focus music, or is that just like your kind of like pressure release kind of thing? Like, because I listen to podcasts usually as like, if I am like cooking or laundry or washing dishes or whatever, but then like, I just listen to like very easy, like lo-fi music when I'm like trying to get work done and stuff. So I don't know where it falls for you.
I think I use it in very different spaces, but it's definitely like a social soundtrack for me in the background when we're hanging out or something like that. Very like light music. But I can also see it like on a stressful day really changing like the tenor of how I'm feeling. And I realized that I really align very quickly, faster than I expected, with EDM and house music and the undertones of that, because soca is a song genre of my culture. I was born in Trinidad, and it marries very well with EDM. In fact, it's like I see now that there are DJs that mash them together because it's very hype, positive, upbeat music with very like positive themes to them as well. So I think they just go really well. So it was a quick transition from one to another. So I think just my love of soca has transferred into this new genre. I say new, but I've been kind of jamming out for like 2-3 years, but like the Afro house is the new territory for me. So I'm a big fan of like Black Coffee, and there's some other great DJs that folks should check out there. So
cool. And like, I guess everything is on Spotify. Do you usually listen to it?
I'm like old fashioned too, so like kind of YouTubing. YouTube is also a great spot for that. So, but I've been between Spotify and YouTube, and it's also the soundtrack in some ways of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Like my EDM house and Afro house love kind of was like solidified there, because like pretty much wherever you go, you'll hear some of that in the background. So it just happens naturally.
Interesting. No, and that's good. Yeah, I mean, and like YouTube, I feel like is like also like trying to lean in to be like the music platform now, because like people do use it so much for that. So it's just like, all right, let's just embrace it.
No shade to like what's it called, Pandora. I hope they're not one of your sponsors or something. But like wow, I feel bad for like folks like that. They had like the recipe for success. I almost equate Pandora to like the Chipotle of music. Like you had the recipe for success, and like something went wrong. Like what happened? And like they're like struggling to kind of like, you know, get to where the Spotify's of the world are. But I guess that's what it is. And you know, fast-paced worlds of innovation and entrepreneurship, to have to evolve quickly. You know, what is the saying? Like move fast and break things. Like I guess that's the way you need to do. You know, but I always think about those two organizations, like Chipotle and Pandora, as like, what happened? Like, you know, you had it all right.
And the idea that, like, I think they've solidified enough to just like, they'll just be around. But yeah, they've sort of lost that like kind of panache, or, you know, that sort of like.
Exactly. Yeah. But like, they were right on line. Like, that's always what scares me about investments, because like that would have been two places I would have heavily invested in, you know? And it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
I
Because
don't
like at
know.
the time, it's like, they're never going away. Like they're like,
Exactly. And like, nope, they're gone. Like, not
yeah.
extinct, but
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
shout out
because
to
it's
them.
like,
They're
yeah,
great
they're
organization.
still around, but not as valuable. Yeah.
Right. Great place. Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. Well, I guess before we get to a finer question, I almost want to ask about that specifically. Like, is there anything else that you feel like specifically, like, because I feel like you living abroad for several years,
Yeah.
like in a very culturally different place, like
Mm-hmm.
what other pieces do you feel like are like the most kind of cherished moments or memories or things that like still resonate with you? Like, obviously it's like sometimes simple stuff of just like, because I think for me, it's not nearly a close parallel, but like I lived
Yeah.
in Maine for 2 years and they have a lot of craft beer there. And it's like, that's
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
like, it's just like wherever you live, like you kind of probably take
Right.
something where it's like, oh, here's like, I
Right.
really got a flavor for this food or something,
Yeah.
So yeah, like anything else
Huh.
that kind of resonates from like that time
That's
that
a
you had?
great question. Anyone that knows me knows I love the UAE. You would think I was born and bred there. Like I love Trinidad, I love New York too. But that has been I consider that home in some ways to me. And I equate Abu Dhabi to Queens, New York, if anyone has been there, and Dubai to like Manhattan. So like very different pace, but like both beautiful in different ways. But I will say my experience, some of the things that resonate for me was one, coming from a place like New York where I grew up on the New York, like not on the New York subway system, like I'm like traveling the New York City subway system and going to high school in Manhattan and, always having my senses aware of things and ready for something to happen and being really responsive. And being that way and going into my experience in the Middle East like that, it didn't fit at all because it was very different in terms of the levels of safety, the things I would have to worry about. Like, so in the beginning, I was very guarded. By the end of my 3 years, it's like you could leave your purse or bag in one aisle of the grocery store, walk to the other if you forgot your cheese, and come back. Like, I've lost my phone in taxis after a fun brunch, and the taxi driver would find a way to drop it back to me. Like that's unheard of. And it really changed the way I see where I want my children to grow up, the type of spaces. Like, yes, there's cool to have that street smarts and that savvy, but it's all another thing to like just not be so worried about things all the time. And just also the pace with that, like with work and like, for example, we would have a conference or like a session. NASPA would even has an international conference there. It's called the MENA conference, Middle East and North Africa conference for NASPA. And, great conference, but like even the pace of that, like, you get some coffee or some tea, you chat with your colleagues, the lunch is a longer, more leisurely experience. Like, there's time to really connect with folks. And it drove me crazy when I first got there. But by the end, I really appreciated that I was able to like shift gears in terms of the pace of life. And now, even though that was my first professional experience, I think the way I conceptualize work-life balance is forever tarnished. So it's great in some ways, but what does that mean for me is that like afternoons on the weekdays, we would go hang out at the beach in the afternoons, like, watch the sunset. Like, what does that look like in this context to be able to cultivate the work-life balance that I kind of cut my teeth on? So that's something I'm really thinking about. And like, are there spaces in the US that can offer me that same lifestyle? Some would say Cali, like, but I'm just really thinking about that in terms of if that is a value of mine now, where do I find that again? Or is that something I just need to like let go of in this early to mid stage professional career and hope for the best in my later stages? So those are the things I think about when I think about Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Just great cities. And I would definitely encourage anyone that hasn't had a chance to visit.
Yeah. No, that's great though. Yeah. And I think just the open-mindedness, where it's not as if you went into the spaces being like, oh, this is like the wrong way to be and my way is the right way.
Right.
And it's like, you probably would not have like really survived very long because it would just been this friction.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like, yeah. And you went in and sort of, like it something kind of stuck with you sort of thing. And it still sort of, sits in your heart and kind of resonates as you sort of exist in other spaces as well. But
absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I guess then we will end on the optimistic note that I like to wrap things up with. So, with your, amazing journey and kind of unique journey through different, facets of higher ed. And as you look ahead to the future, what are things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world? So kind of any of those or all of those, just anything that you're looking forward to.
Oh, looking forward to. I'll say my professional life. I'm looking forward to consistency. I've like been up and down, back and forth, international, like in domestic, and really excited about like landing in a role or continuing a role where I can like reuse the emails from last year and like, and have a template for something, because I've been really on the go and transitioning, and I'm grateful for the jungle gym of professional life that I've been on, and the flexibility to do so. But I'm also ready for some consistency where I can pull up the like event I did last year and use the same template. Like, that has not been a hallmark of my experience. I've been shifting and changing, and I would love to be in a place where I can have that order and that consistency. And in general, this is really corny and cliche, but it's around graduation time, right? So I'm excited for some of the people, the students here at Harvard, at Rutgers, my undergrad or Westbury. I'm excited for NYU and Abu Dhabi. I'm excited for the students that I've seen push through the difficulties of undergrad or grad school or the PhD process. And like, this is an exciting time of year where all that work is realized and actualized, and you get to see the return on investment. And I think, or begin to see the return on investment. And I think this is just like exciting time. May is around the corner. And I'm really excited about celebrating here and like internationally with all those that have come through and pushed for themselves, their families, their communities, and their trajectories, to just do better for themselves. So, yeah.
Yeah. It is a beautiful time of year for many reasons, like literally the weather, but then also, just like.
Yes. And I know it's really corny and cliche, but I actually mean it.
No, yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it's like if you needed that little like shot in the arm of just like joy, it's just seeing all these people who would say it's like they put in so much work, and especially people who are the first in their family, or just I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and I think anybody who works in higher ed, I think it never gets old, kind of thing. Like I hope it doesn't.
Right.
So
perfect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, appreciate all that you shared. I appreciate you making time for the show, and great catching up with you and everything. So yeah, thank you so much again, and just have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I appreciate it. Have a great day too.
This podcast is part of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at connectedu.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.